Long before names were given to diseases, before bones were counted or organs described, there was pain. It came suddenly or slowly. It came in the night or after a fall or with the changing of the seasons. A sharp ache in the chest, a fever that would not cool, a wound that darkened instead of healing. To early humans, illness was not a problem to be solved. It was a presence, something felt, feared, and endured. In a world without explanation, sickness felt like a message, or a punishment, or a warning. Imagine the earliest communities gathered close to firelight. The air smells of smoke and earth. The body is understood only through sensation, hunger, warmth, exhaustion, relief. When someone falls ill, the group watches closely. Not out of curiosity, but necessity. Survival depends on noticing patterns. Who recovers, who does not. What plants soothe pain. What wounds close. What deaths come without reason. Medicine begins here, not as science, but as attention. Every culture, in every place, faced the same question. What do we do when the body fails? At first, there were no answers, only guesses shaped by fear and hope. Illness was invisible, and so its causes were imagined. Spirits, curses, displeased ancestors, an imbalance in the unseen world. To treat the body, early healers believed they must first treat what lay beyond it. And so medicine and belief grew together. The first healers were not surgeons or physicians. They were listeners, watchers, rememberers. People who noticed which leaves reduced swelling, which roots eased pain, which rituals calmed the terrified and the dying. Over generations, this knowledge accumulated, passed quietly through stories and demonstrations long before it was written down. Healing was communal. A sick person was never treated alone. The body belonged to the group, and so did its suffering. As human societies grew more complex, so did their understanding of illness. The world itself began to feel ordered. The sky followed patterns. Rivers flooded and retreated. The seasons returned. If nature followed rules, perhaps the body did too. This was a radical idea. It suggested that sickness might not be random, that pain could have causes, that recovery could be guided. But this understanding came slowly. For thousands of years, medicine remained a fragile balance between observation and belief, between what could be seen and what had to be imagined. In ancient villages and early cities, healers occupied a strange position. They were both trusted and feared, called upon in moments of desperation, blamed when treatments failed, revered when they worked. Their tools were simple: hands, water, stone blades, herbs crushed and brewed, words spoken softly or chanted aloud. Sometimes healing came from the treatment itself. Sometimes it came from belief. Often it came from both. And when it did not, death followed as it always had, quietly and without explanation. Yet even failure taught lessons. A wound cleaned survived more often than one left untouched. A patient rested recovered more often than one forced to work. Certain foods strengthened the weak. Certain practices brought harm. These observations, accumulated slowly over centuries, formed the earliest foundations of medical thought. With the rise of writing, medicine began to change. For the first time, knowledge could outlive the healer. Diagnoses could be recorded, treatments compared, mistakes preserved. Medicine could now move forward without starting over each generation. In Mesopotamia, Egypt, India, China, Greece, and beyond, different civilizations began asking the same questions in their own ways. What is the body made of? Why does it fail? Can balance be restored once it is lost? Some sought answers in the stars, others in philosophy, others in anatomy itself. In Egypt, embalmers learned the body through preparation for the afterlife, gaining an understanding of organs long before anatomy was formalized. In India, physicians focused on balance between breath, energy, and bodily systems. In China, health was harmony, illness a disruption in flow. In Greece, reason entered the body, and disease was framed as a natural phenomenon rather than a divine one. Each approach was incomplete. Each was flawed. Yet each moved medicine forward. What unites them is not accuracy, but intention. These early practitioners were not careless. They were careful. They worked within the limits of what they could know. They documented symptoms. They categorized pain. They debated causes. They refined methods. Slowly, medicine shifted from ritual alone toward observation, ethics, and responsibility. Still, progress was fragile. Advances were often lost, rediscovered, and lost again. Wars burned libraries. Empires collapsed. Superstition returned where knowledge had once grown. Even as surgical tools improved, understanding lagged behind. Operations were performed without anesthesia. Infection was not yet understood. Pain was endured because there was no alternative. And yet people continued to try. This persistence is the quiet heart of medical history. Not triumph, but endurance. For most of human history, to practice medicine was to stand between hope and uncertainty, to touch suffering without knowing the outcome, to cut, to cauterize, to bind wounds, knowing that help and harm lived close together. The story of medicine is not a straight line toward progress. It is a long, uneven path shaped by culture, belief, fear, and compassion. Every advancement rests on countless failures. Every modern technique echoes experiments once performed with trembling hands. As you listen, you are hearing the accumulated effort of thousands of years, of healers who worked without certainty, of patients who trusted without proof, of societies that tried again and again to make sense of the fragile human body. This is not a story of heroes or miracles. It is a story of care, of hands placed gently on fevered skin, of whispered reassurance, of communities gathering around the sick, hoping for recovery, preparing for loss. This is Archive of Rest, a place for long, gentle history, meant to be listened to slowly. If you'd like more stories like this, you can subscribe and rest here whenever you need. As we move through this history, we will not rush. We will walk through time as medicine itself did, slowly, cautiously, shaped by observation and belief. From the earliest shamans to the first surgeons who dared to open the body, this is the story of how humanity learned, piece by piece, to care for itself. Not perfectly, not quickly, but persistently. And, as with all histories meant for rest, you don't need to remember every detail. You don't need to follow every name or date. Let the rhythm carry you. Let the story unfold at its own pace. Because long before medicine became a science, it was something quieter. It was an act of attention, and it still is. Before medicine had a name, it existed as an instinct. Long before symbols were carved into stone or ink pressed onto papyrus, the human body was already being studied, quietly, patiently, through repetition and necessity. Pain taught lessons quickly. Hunger did the same. Injury, illness, birth, and death shaped understanding long before theory followed. In these early worlds, survival depended on attention. A cut that festered meant danger. A fever that lingered meant loss. A broken limb threatened not just one life, but the stability of the group. To care for the body was not an abstract act. It was urgent, practical, and deeply communal. There were no doctors. There were no patients. Only people bound together by dependence. In small hunter-gatherer groups, knowledge was carried by memory. What soothed pain was remembered. What caused harm was avoided. Over time, certain individuals became known for their ability to heal, not because they understood the body in a modern sense, but because they noticed patterns others missed. These early healers were not specialists. They hunted, gathered, raised children, and aged alongside everyone else. But they were observant. They remembered which leaves numbed pain when chewed, which bark lowered fever, which wounds healed cleanly when washed with water, and which ones did not. This knowledge was never written. It was spoken, demonstrated, passed from elder to apprentice through repetition and trust. But medicine in this era was never only physical. Without an understanding of internal anatomy or invisible pathogens, illness demanded explanation. And when causes could not be seen, they were imagined. Pain that arrived without injury felt intentional. A sickness that spread through the group felt purposeful. Death, especially sudden death, demanded meaning. And so illness became spiritual. Across continents and cultures, the role of the shaman emerged, not as a physician in the modern sense, but as a mediator between worlds. The shaman stood between the visible and the invisible, tasked with restoring balance when the body faltered. Illness was not simply a failure of flesh. It was a disturbance, a soul displaced, a spirit angered, a harmony broken. Treatment followed this belief. Healing rituals often took place at night, by firelight, where shadows moved and sound carried easily. Drums echoed heartbeats. Chants repeated until they altered perception. Smoke from burning herbs filled the air, inhaled deeply, altering awareness for both healer and patient. These rituals were not meaningless. They calmed fear. They focused attention. They gathered the community around the sick. In a world where panic could be as deadly as disease, reassurance was powerful medicine. The body responded to belief more than early healers could ever have known. Pain softened when fear lessened. Recovery improved when rest was enforced through ritual. Placebo and pharmacology intertwined, inseparable. At the same time, shamans were often the keepers of botanical knowledge. Their spiritual authority allowed them to experiment cautiously. Over generations, plants were tested, not scientifically, but empirically. Some killed, others healed. The memory of each outcome was preserved through story. In this way, early medicine was conservative. Dangerous plants were avoided. Helpful ones were protected. Healing knowledge became sacred, guarded carefully to prevent misuse. Surgery, in its earliest form, already existed. Archaeological evidence reveals trepanation, holes drilled or scraped into the skull, performed thousands of years ago. Many skulls show signs of healing, meaning the patient survived. Why this was done is still debated. To release pressure after injury, to cure headaches or seizures, to expel spirits. Likely, it was all of these at once. To modern eyes, such practices seem brutal. But context matters. These early procedures were attempts to intervene, rather than surrender. They represent a refusal to accept illness as inevitable. Even without writing, even without theory, people tried. The healer's role was dangerous. Failure was visible. Death followed closely behind mistakes. Yet communities continued to rely on them, because without intervention, illness was guaranteed to win. As humans migrated and settled, healing traditions diversified. Geography shaped medicine. What grew locally became pharmacology. What animals were hunted influenced diet-based treatments. Climate shaped illness, and illness shaped response. Despite these differences, certain themes remained constant. Healing was slow. Observation mattered. Community involvement was essential. And illness was never private. The sick were watched, fed, protected, or in some cases isolated. Decisions were made collectively, balancing compassion against survival. Children learned by watching elders treat wounds. Adolescents assisted in rituals. Knowledge spread, quietly, embedded in daily life. There were no textbooks, only memory and consequence. Over time, some healers gained reputations beyond their immediate groups. People traveled to seek help. Knowledge crossed tribal boundaries through trade, marriage, and migration. Healing traditions blended, adapted, and survived. This exchange laid the groundwork for future systems of medicine. But progress was never guaranteed. When a healer died unexpectedly, knowledge could vanish. When famine struck, ritual might replace observation. When fear dominated, superstition returned with force. Medicine before writing was fragile because it depended entirely on human continuity. Yet it endured. Because even in the most uncertain environments, humans continued to care for the sick, continued to search for patterns, continued to try, despite limited understanding. This persistence mattered. It meant that when writing finally emerged, medicine was not starting from nothing. It already had thousands of years of practice behind it. What writing did was preserve these efforts, allowing them to accumulate rather than disappear. The shamans' chants would eventually become prescriptions. Herbal mixtures would become pharmacology. Ritual observations would become diagnoses. But the spirit of early medicine never vanished. Even today, medicine retains echoes of its origins. The importance of bedside manner. The recognition that belief influences healing. The understanding that care itself has power. Before charts and instruments, medicine was human. It was hands on skin, voices in the dark, firelight flickering across worried faces, a community hoping that this time healing would come. And often, against all odds, it did. That is where this history begins. Not with certainty, but with effort. Not with knowledge, but with attention. In the next chapter, this fragile oral tradition will encounter something new: writing. For the first time, illness will be recorded, classified, and preserved in symbols pressed into clay. Chapter 2. Ancient Mesopotamia. Diagnosis, Omens, and the First Records. Approximately 1,300 words. When writing first appeared in the river valleys of Mesopotamia, it did more than record trade and law. It captured uncertainty. Pressed into soft clay with reed styluses, early cuneiform tablets preserved something fragile and human. Attempts to understand illness. For the first time, suffering could be described, compared, and remembered beyond a single lifetime. Medicine entered history. Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates, was shaped by abundance and danger. Floods brought fertility, but also disease. Dense cities encouraged trade, learning, and the rapid spread of illness. In this environment, healing became both urgent and organized. Yet medicine here did not abandon the spiritual world. Instead, it structured it. Illness was believed to come from the gods, demons, or cosmic imbalance. The body was a surface upon which divine intentions were written. To read the body correctly was to interpret a message. This interpretation was the work of specialists. Two main types of healers practiced side by side. The Ashipu, often translated as exorcist, focused on diagnosis and ritual. The ASU, closer to a physician, prepared treatments using herbs, minerals, and physical methods. Their roles overlapped, but their purposes were distinct. One sought the cause, the other sought the cure. Diagnosis in Mesopotamia was meticulous. Tablets described symptoms in careful sequence. If the patient's eyes darkened, if the skin turned yellow, if the pulse weakened, if pain moved from one side of the body to the other. Each observation mattered. These descriptions were not casual. They were standardized, copied and recopied over generations. One famous diagnostic text, known today as the Diagnostic Handbook, lists hundreds of conditions with conditional statements. If this happens, then that follows. If the illness appears on a certain day, it means one thing. If it lasts beyond another, it means something else. This was not guesswork. It was pattern recognition. Yet interpretation always pointed beyond the body. Symptoms were read as omens. The timing of illness mattered. The position of stars mattered. The patient's social status mattered. Healing required understanding not just the body, but its place within the cosmos. Treatment followed diagnosis, and here the ASU worked carefully. Remedies included poultices, washes, oils, and drinks made from plants, resins, and minerals. Honey was used for wounds. Beer for mixing medicines. Milk, fats, and ashes appeared frequently in prescriptions. Some treatments were practical, others symbolic. Often they were both. A wound might be cleaned and bound while a prayer was recited. A fever might be treated with herbs, while a demon was named and dismissed. There was no contradiction in this. For Mesopotamian healers, the physical and spiritual worlds were inseparable. To heal one without addressing the other was incomplete. Accountability mattered. Unlike earlier oral traditions, written medicine could be judged. Healers were responsible for outcomes. The famous Code of Hammurabi includes laws regulating medical practice. If a surgeon caused death during an operation, punishment followed. If a treatment succeeded, reward followed. This legal structure reveals something important. Medicine was recognized as powerful and dangerous. Intervention could heal or kill. The healer's role carried risk, authority, and consequence. Surgery existed, though it was limited. Procedures focused on visible injuries, abscesses, wounds, fractures. Internal operations were rare and feared. Without anesthesia or understanding of infection, restraint was necessary. Even so, the attempt mattered. Mesopotamian medicine valued order. Disease disrupted order. Healing sought to restore it. This worldview shaped how illness was experienced. Patients were not blamed for their sickness. Instead, they were caught in larger forces. The role of medicine was to negotiate with those forces on their behalf. In this way, medicine offered comfort even when cures failed. The presence of written records also allowed medicine to evolve. Treatments could be refined. Ineffective remedies could be discarded. Successful ones repeated. Over time, patterns became clearer. Certain herbs appeared again and again. Certain rituals remained unchanged. Knowledge stabilized. Yet limitations persisted. Without anatomy, without germ theory, without controlled experimentation, Mesopotamian medicine could not escape its cosmological framework. But within those limits, it achieved remarkable consistency. Healing became a profession rather than a personal trait. Training mattered. Tradition mattered. Lineage mattered. And, perhaps most importantly, memory mattered. Clay tablets preserved not certainty, but effort. They recorded humanity's earliest systematic attempts to read the body and respond with care. In the centuries that followed, Mesopotamian medical texts traveled. They influenced neighboring cultures. Ideas crossed borders alongside trade goods. This knowledge would not remain isolated. In Egypt, medicine would take a different path, one shaped by order, anatomy, and the preparation of bodies for eternity. There, the human form would be studied not as a message from the gods, but as a structure that could be understood. When writing first appeared in the river valleys of Mesopotamia, it did more than record trade and law. It captured uncertainty. Pressed into soft clay with reed styluses, early cuneiform tablets preserved something fragile and human. Attempts to understand illness. For the first time, suffering could be described, compared, and remembered beyond a single lifetime. Medicine entered history. Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates, was shaped by abundance and danger. Floods brought fertility, but also disease. Dense cities encouraged trade, learning, and the rapid spread of illness. In this environment, healing became both urgent and organized. Yet medicine here did not abandon the spiritual world. Instead, it structured it. Illness was believed to come from the gods, demons, or cosmic imbalance. The body was a surface upon which divine intentions were written. To read the body correctly was to interpret a message. This interpretation was the work of specialists, two main types of healers practiced side by side. The Ashipu, often translated as exorcist, focused on diagnosis and ritual. The ASU, closer to a physician, prepared treatments using herbs, minerals, and physical methods. Their roles overlapped, but their purposes were distinct. One sought the cause, the other sought the cure. Diagnosis in Mesopotamia was meticulous. Tablets described symptoms in careful sequence. If the patient's eyes darkened, if the skin turned yellow, if the pulse weakened, if pain moved from one side of the body to the other. Each observation mattered. These descriptions were not casual. They were standardized, copied and recopied over generations. One famous diagnostic text, known today as the Diagnostic Handbook, lists hundreds of conditions with conditional statements. If this happens, then that follows. If the illness appears on a certain day, it means one thing. If it lasts beyond another, it means something else. This was not guesswork. It was pattern recognition. Yet interpretation always pointed beyond the body. Symptoms were read as omens. The timing of illness mattered. The position of stars mattered. The patient's social status mattered. Healing required understanding not just the body, but its place within the cosmos. Treatment followed diagnosis, and here the ASU worked carefully. Remedies included poultices, washes, oils, and drinks made from plants, resins, and minerals. Honey was used for wounds, beer for mixing medicines. Milk, fats, and ashes appeared frequently in prescriptions. Some treatments were practical, others symbolic. Often they were both. A wound might be cleaned and bound while a prayer was recited. A fever might be treated with herbs while a demon was named and dismissed. There was no contradiction in this. For Mesopotamian healers, the physical and spiritual worlds were inseparable. To heal one without addressing the other was incomplete. Accountability mattered. Unlike earlier oral traditions, written medicine could be judged. Healers were responsible for outcomes. The famous Code of Hammurabi includes laws regulating medical practice. If a surgeon caused death during an operation, punishment followed. If a treatment succeeded, reward followed. This legal structure reveals something important. Medicine was recognized as powerful and dangerous. Intervention could heal or kill. The healer's role carried risk, authority, and consequence. Surgery existed, though it was limited. Procedures focused on visible injuries, abscesses, wounds, fractures. Internal operations were rare and feared. Without anesthesia or understanding of infection, restraint was necessary. Even so, the attempt mattered. Mesopotamian medicine valued order. Disease disrupted order. Healing sought to restore it. This worldview shaped how illness was experienced. Patients were not blamed for their sickness. Instead, they were caught in larger forces. The role of medicine was to negotiate with those forces on their behalf. In this way, medicine offered comfort even when cures failed. The presence of written records also allowed medicine to evolve. Treatments could be refined. Ineffective remedies could be discarded. Successful ones repeated. Over time, patterns became clearer. Certain herbs appeared again and again. Certain rituals remained unchanged. Knowledge stabilized, yet limitations persisted. Without anatomy, without germ theory, without controlled experimentation, Mesopotamian medicine could not escape its cosmological framework. But within those limits, it achieved remarkable consistency. Healing became a profession rather than a personal trait. Training mattered. Tradition mattered. Lineage mattered. And, perhaps most importantly, memory mattered. Clay tablets preserved not certainty, but effort. They recorded humanity's earliest systematic attempts to read the body and respond with care. In the centuries that followed, Mesopotamian medical texts traveled. They influenced neighboring cultures. Ideas crossed borders alongside trade goods. This knowledge would not remain isolated. In Egypt, medicine would take a different path, one shaped by order, anatomy, and the preparation of bodies for eternity. There, the human form would be studied not as a message from the gods, but as a structure that could be understood. Along the steady flow of the Nile, medicine took on a different rhythm. Where Mesopotamia saw illness as a message to be interpreted, ancient Egypt approached the body as something ordered, structured, knowable, and deeply connected to the balance of the world. Life in Egypt was shaped by repetition. The river flooded and retreated. Crops grew and were harvested. The sun rose and set with unwavering reliability. This sense of cosmic order, known as Ma'at, defined how Egyptians understood health and disease. Illness, like chaos, was a disruption of balance. To restore health was to restore order. Egyptian medicine developed within a society that valued continuity and preservation above all else. This worldview profoundly shaped how healers approached the body, not only in life, but in death. Unlike many earlier cultures, Egyptians studied the human body closely, though not for reasons of curiosity or experimentation. Their knowledge emerged from ritual. Mummification required intimate familiarity with anatomy. Embalmers removed organs, treated tissues, and prepared bodies to endure eternity. Over centuries, this repeated process created an understanding of internal structures unmatched elsewhere in the ancient world. The heart was central, the brain less so. Egyptians believed the heart was the seat of thought, memory, and identity. It was carefully preserved within the body. The brain, by contrast, was removed through the nose and discarded. This belief shaped medical theory for generations. Yet, despite misconceptions, Egyptian healers possessed remarkable practical knowledge. Medical papyri, written records preserved on fragile plant fibers, offer a window into this world. Among them, the Edwin Smith Papyrus stands apart. It is clinical, methodical, and strikingly rational. Injuries are described systematically. Prognoses are offered plainly. Treatments are practical. For each case, the physician observes, diagnoses, and decides whether the condition is treatable, contestable, or untreatable. This language matters. It reveals a medical culture that accepted limits. Not every illness could be cured. Not every patient could be saved. Naming these boundaries was an act of honesty. The Ebers Papyrus, by contrast, reflects a broader medical landscape. It contains hundreds of remedies for ailments ranging from digestive disorders to skin diseases. Herbal mixtures appear alongside incantations. Magic and medicine coexist, not in conflict, but in cooperation. This duality defined Egyptian healing. Physicians, known as Estudon-W, were trained professionals. Many specialized. Some treated eyes, others teeth, others internal ailments. Dentistry was surprisingly advanced. Prosthetic devices existed. Teeth were drilled. Pain was managed with plant-based anesthetics. Surgery was cautious but real. Wounds were cleaned, stitched, and bandaged. Fractures were splinted. Burns were treated with honey and resin, substances now known to have antibacterial properties. Hygiene mattered. Cleanliness was emphasized not only for ritual purity, but for healing. The environment shaped medicine. The Nile provided both nourishment and danger. Waterborne disease was common. Parasites affected organs and blood. Egyptian physicians recognized symptoms even if causes remained unclear. Treatment focused on managing effects rather than eradicating origins. Disease was still understood within a spiritual framework. Gods and spirits could cause illness. Protective amulets were worn. Spells were spoken. But unlike in purely ritual systems, observation mattered deeply. If a wound looked infected, it was treated differently. If pain worsened, the prognosis changed. Experience guided response. Medicine in Egypt was not experimental in the modern sense, but it was empirical. Generations of physicians copied texts, refined recipes, and preserved successful practices. Knowledge accumulated slowly but steadily. The social role of healers was respected. Physicians served at royal courts, in temples, and among common people. Medicine was not exclusive to elites. Even laborers received care, especially those working on state projects. This accessibility mattered. It meant medical knowledge was applied broadly. Patterns were observed across populations. Treatments were tested repeatedly. Women also played roles in healing, particularly in childbirth and gynecology. Medical texts include detailed instructions for pregnancy, fertility, and contraception. These practices were grounded in experience, even when framed through symbolic language. Death was never far from Egyptian medicine. The afterlife shaped every aspect of care. The body had to remain intact for eternity. This belief encouraged careful treatment and preservation. Surgery avoided unnecessary damage. Healing aimed not just to prolong life, but to maintain bodily integrity. This perspective gave Egyptian medicine a conservatism that limited innovation but protected patients. Pain was endured but not ignored. Comfort mattered. Order mattered. In time, Egyptian medical knowledge spread beyond the Nile. Greek travelers studied in Egyptian temples. Ideas crossed borders quietly, carried by scribes and scholars. But Egyptian medicine did not seek to dominate or reform other systems. It existed within its own cosmology, confident and stable. Its greatest contribution was balance, between magic and observation, between intervention and restraint, between acceptance and effort. Egyptian physicians understood something essential, that healing is not only about curing disease, but about caring for the body within a meaningful framework. Their patients were not collections of symptoms. They were beings embedded in cosmic order, history, and eternity. This perspective shaped medicine for centuries. As we move forward, this balance will shift. In India and China, medicine will become deeply philosophical, focused on energy and harmony. In Greece, reason will challenge tradition. Anatomy will replace ritual. Debate will replace continuity. But Egypt stands as a bridge between the spiritual medicine of prehistory and the analytical medicine yet to come. In the ancient landscapes of the Indian subcontinent, medicine grew not from the study of death, but from the careful observation of life. Where other traditions focused on injury, illness, and intervention, Ayurveda, one of the world's oldest continuous medical systems, began with balance. Health was not defined as the absence of disease, but as harmony, between body and mind, between breath and nourishment, between the individual and the wider world. This perspective shaped everything that followed. Ayurveda emerged gradually, embedded in the philosophical and spiritual traditions of ancient India. Its knowledge was first preserved through oral transmission, long before it was written down in texts such as the Karaka Samhita and the Sushruta Samhita. These works did not present medicine as a collection of remedies, but as a way of living. To be healthy was to live in alignment. At the center of Ayurvedic thought were the doshas, Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. These were not substances, but tendencies, patterns of movement, heat, and stability within the body. Every person carried all three, but in different proportions. Health depended on balance among them. Illness arose when balance was lost. This idea changed how disease was approached. Rather than asking only what illness a person had, Ayurvedic physicians asked who the person was, their constitution, their habits, their environment, their emotions. Treatment was not standardized. It was individualized. Observation was slow and attentive. Physicians examined the pulse, the tongue, the eyes, the skin. They listened to the voice. They asked about sleep, digestion, appetite, and mood. Diagnosis was not rushed. It unfolded over time. This patience reflected a broader cultural understanding. The body was not a machine to be repaired, but a living system to be guided. Herbal medicine played a central role. Thousands of plants were cataloged, not only for treating illness, but for maintaining health. Food itself was medicine. Spices, oils, and preparations were chosen for their effects on digestion, circulation, and mental clarity. Hygiene mattered deeply. Regular bathing, oral care, and cleanliness were emphasized. Exercise, particularly walking and yoga, supported circulation and breath. Breathing itself, prana, was considered fundamental to life. Techniques for controlling breath were used to calm the mind and strengthen the body. Ayurveda recognized the connection between mental and physical health long before modern psychology. Stress, grief, and imbalance of emotion were seen as causes of illness. Healing required addressing the whole person. Yet Ayurveda was not purely gentle or passive. Surgery existed, and in some cases it was advanced. The Sushruta Samhita describes detailed surgical techniques, including the use of instruments, suturing, and even reconstructive procedures such as nasal repair. These operations required precision, preparation, and anatomical knowledge. Students trained through long apprenticeships. They practiced on models made from vegetables and leather before touching human flesh. This emphasis on preparation reduced harm and built skill. Pain was acknowledged and managed, though anesthesia was limited. Alcohol, herbs, and controlled restraint were used. Surgery was considered a last resort, undertaken only when other treatments failed. This restraint reflected Ayurvedic values. Intervention should never exceed necessity. Healing should work with the body, not against it. Ethics were explicit. Physicians were expected to live disciplined lives. They were to be calm, compassionate, clean, and truthful. Greed was discouraged. Exploiting patients was condemned. The healer's character mattered as much as their knowledge. This ethical foundation strengthened trust. Medicine in ancient India was not separated from daily life. It was woven into routines, rituals, and social norms. Prevention was emphasized over cure. Seasonal changes guided behavior. Diet shifted with climate. Rest was respected. Illness was not shameful, it was a signal. The social reach of Ayurveda was broad. Kings consulted physicians, so did villagers. Knowledge circulated through families and communities. Women played key roles in midwifery and household medicine. Texts were preserved and transmitted carefully. Commentary expanded understanding over centuries. While innovation was cautious, continuity was strong. Ayurvedic medicine did not seek to conquer disease. It sought to maintain equilibrium. This approach had limits. Without microscopes or modern anatomy, causes of infection remained invisible. Some treatments were ineffective. Others worked through mechanisms not yet understood. But the system's strength lay in its holistic view. It recognized complexity. As trade routes expanded, Ayurvedic ideas traveled. They influenced neighboring regions and later intersected with Islamic medical scholarship. Knowledge flowed outward, not as conquest, but as exchange. What distinguished Ayurvedic medicine was its patience, its refusal to reduce the body to parts alone, its insistence that health was not a state to be achieved once, but a balance to be maintained daily. This philosophy would contrast sharply with developments elsewhere. In China, medicine would also center on balance, but expressed through energy and flow rather than constitution. In Greece, balance would be reframed through reason and theory. Each system would grapple with the same question from different angles. But Ayurveda stands as a reminder that some of the oldest medical traditions were also among the most comprehensive. They did not ask only how to treat illness. They asked how to live. In ancient China, medicine developed as a quiet dialogue between the body and the natural world. Health was not measured by strength or absence of pain alone, but by harmony. Harmony between opposing forces. Harmony between internal systems. Harmony between the individual and the rhythms of heaven and earth. This way of seeing shaped Chinese medicine from its earliest forms. Unlike traditions that sought to name disease as an external enemy, Chinese physicians focused on movement, flow, balance. Life itself was understood as energy, qi, circulating through the body in patterns that mirrored rivers, winds, and seasons. When this flow was smooth, the body thrived. When it was blocked or excessive, illness followed. This framework did not arise suddenly. It evolved over centuries, shaped by observation, philosophy, and daily experience. Early Chinese medicine was closely linked to Taoist thought, which emphasized natural balance and non-interference. The healer's role was not to force the body into health, but to guide it back toward equilibrium. Medical knowledge was preserved in classical texts, most notably the Huangdi Neijing, or the Yellow Emperor's Inner Canon. This work framed medicine as a conversation between ruler and advisor, emphasizing wisdom, restraint, and long-term care. Disease was not random. It followed patterns tied to climate, diet, emotion, and behavior. Heat, cold, dampness, dryness, these forces affected the body just as they affected the land. Emotional extremes were also recognized as causes of illness. Anger, grief, fear, and joy all influenced internal balance. Diagnosis in Chinese medicine was slow and attentive. Physicians observed posture, complexion, and movement. They listened to the voice and breathing. They examined the tongue, noting color, shape, and coating. They felt the pulse in multiple positions, interpreting rhythm, strength, and depth. Each detail mattered. Rather than isolating a single symptom, healers sought to understand the whole pattern. Treatment followed diagnosis carefully, adjusted over time as the body responded. Herbal medicine formed a central pillar of care. Plants, roots, minerals, and animal products were classified by taste, temperature, and effect. Prescriptions were balanced combinations, designed to correct imbalance rather than overpower it. Food was medicine. Dietary guidance accompanied treatment. Certain food warmed the body, others cooled it. Meals changed with seasons and constitution. Prevention was always preferred to cure. Acupuncture emerged from this same understanding of flow. By stimulating specific points along meridians, pathways through which qi was believed to travel, physicians sought to release blockages and restore movement. Needles were fine and precise. Treatment was deliberate, not aggressive. Moxibustion, the burning of herbs near the skin, provided warmth and stimulation. Massage techniques, breathing exercises, and movement practices complemented medical care. Chinese medicine valued subtlety. Intervention was measured. Excessive treatment was discouraged. The best physician, it was said, treated illness before it appeared. Ethics were woven into practice. Healers were expected to be calm, patient, and morally grounded. Greed and haste were seen as threats to healing. Knowledge was respected, but humility was essential. Medicine was not isolated from governance or philosophy. The health of the body mirrored the health of the state. Balance within reflected balance without. This perspective encouraged long-term thinking. Illness was not merely an event, it was a process. Healing took time. Like other ancient systems, Chinese medicine had limitations. Without modern anatomy or microbiology, internal mechanisms remained theoretical. Some explanations were symbolic rather than literal. Yet effectiveness was judged by outcome, not theory. Many treatments worked, others did not. Experience guided refinement. What distinguished Chinese medicine was its continuity. Texts were preserved, commented upon, and adapted. Knowledge accumulated without being erased by collapse or conquest. Even as dynasties rose and fell, medical tradition endured. This stability allowed refinement over centuries. Subtle distinctions were added, patterns clarified, treatments improved. As trade expanded along the Silk Road, Chinese medical ideas traveled. They influenced neighboring regions and were influenced in return. Exchange enriched understanding. Yet Chinese medicine remained grounded in its core principles. Balance, flow, harmony. As we move forward, medicine will begin to shift toward abstraction and debate. In Greece, thinkers will seek to explain the body through reason and theory. Observation will remain important, but explanation will take center stage. The body will become something to analyze rather than a line. Chinese medicine reminds us that healing can follow another path, one that listens before it intervenes. In the ancient Greek world, medicine began to change its voice. Where earlier traditions spoke through ritual, balance, and harmony, Greek medicine turned toward explanation. Illness was no longer only something to be endured or aligned with. It was something to be understood, to be argued about, to be reasoned through. This shift did not happen all at once. Greek medicine grew out of older traditions, absorbing ideas from Egypt, Mesopotamia, and beyond. But it transformed them by placing human reasoning at the center of healing. For the first time, disease was framed as a natural phenomenon. This idea was radical. To say that illness came from nature rather than the gods challenged centuries of belief. It did not deny the divine entirely, but it reduced its role. The body, Greek physicians argued, followed rules. If those rules could be understood, illness could be predicted and managed. At the heart of this transformation was observation. Physicians watched patients carefully. They recorded symptoms. They noted changes over time. They compared cases. They debated causes. This approach is most strongly associated with Hippocrates, a physician whose name would later become synonymous with medicine itself. Whether Hippocrates wrote all the texts attributed to him is uncertain. What matters is the tradition that formed around his name. The Hippocratic corpus presented a new way of thinking. Disease was no longer a punishment. It was an imbalance, not spiritual, but physical. Health depended on the proper mixture of bodily fluids known as humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Each humor corresponded to qualities: hot, cold, wet, dry, and to seasons and temperaments. Illness arose when these humors fell out of balance. Though incorrect by modern standards, this theory provided a coherent framework. It allowed physicians to explain symptoms, predict outcomes, and justify treatments. It replaced myth with model. Treatment followed logic. If a patient had too much heat, cooling remedies were used. If dryness prevailed, moisture was introduced. Diet, exercise, rest, and environment were adjusted. Medicine became a practice of moderation. Aggressive intervention was discouraged. The body, physicians believed, had an innate ability to heal itself. The role of the healer was to support this process, not dominate it. This restraint shaped Greek medical ethics. The Hippocratic Oath emphasized responsibility. Physicians were to avoid harm. They were to respect patients. They were to practice within their limits. This ethical framework distinguished medicine from magic. Physicians no longer claimed supernatural power. They claimed knowledge, discipline, and judgment. Greek medicine also advanced anatomy, though cautiously. Human dissection was limited by cultural and religious boundaries. Much anatomical knowledge came from animal study. Errors persisted, yet curiosity grew. The brain, rather than the heart, began to be considered the seat of thought by some thinkers. Others debated fiercely. Medicine became a field of argument. Public debate mattered. Greek culture valued discourse. Medical ideas were presented, criticized, refined. Schools of thought emerged, competing for influence. There was no single authority. This plurality encouraged innovation, but also confusion. Without experimentation, many theories coexisted without resolution. Surgery existed, though it remained secondary to internal medicine. Greek surgeons treated wounds, fractures, and dislocations. Instruments improved. Techniques were refined. But surgery was risky and limited. Pain management was minimal. Infection was poorly understood. Restraint remained necessary. Hospitals, as later understood, did not exist. Care took place in homes or healing temples dedicated to Asclepius, the god of medicine. These temples blended ritual and observation. Patients slept within sacred spaces, reporting dreams believed to offer guidance. Even as reason advanced, belief persisted. Greek medicine did not erase spirituality. It reframed it. Healing became a collaboration between natural processes and human care. One of Greek medicine's most lasting contributions was its focus on prognosis. Physicians learned to observe not only what was wrong, but what would happen next. This skill guided treatment and managed expectations. To predict was to demonstrate understanding. Greek medicine spread widely. Through conquest, trade, and education, its ideas traveled across the Mediterranean. Roman physicians would adopt and adapt Greek theories. Islamic scholars would preserve and expand them. Medieval Europe would inherit them almost intact. The humoral system would dominate medicine for over 1,000 years. This longevity speaks not to its accuracy, but to its usefulness. It provided a structure within which physicians could work thoughtfully and ethically, even when cures were limited. Greek medicine marked a turning point. It did not solve illness, it reframed it. The body became something to study rather than fear. Disease became something to explain rather than appease. The healer became a practitioner of judgment rather than ritual alone. Yet limits remained. Without tools to see inside the body, without understanding of infection, progress was slow. Theory sometimes replaced observation rather than supporting it. Debate could stagnate. Still, medicine had crossed a threshold. Reason had entered the body. As we move forward, Roman medicine will emphasize practicality and organization. Systems will replace schools. Surgery and public health will gain prominence. Healing will become less philosophical and more infrastructural. When Rome absorbed the medical traditions of Greece, it did not preserve them unchanged. It reorganized them. Roman culture valued utility over theory, order over debate, and results over philosophy. Where Greek physicians argued, Romans built. Where Greeks speculated, Romans standardized. Medicine, like roads and aqueducts, became part of the machinery of empire. Health was not merely a personal concern, it was a public one. The strength of Rome depended on the bodies of its citizens and soldiers. Illness weakened armies. Disease disrupted cities. Healing became a matter of state interest. This perspective reshaped medical practice. Greek physicians were often brought to Rome as teachers and practitioners. Their theories, especially the humoral system, remained influential. But Roman medicine emphasized application. Treatments were judged by effectiveness rather than elegance. One of Rome's greatest medical contributions was organization. Military medicine developed rapidly. Legions required constant care. Battlefield injuries demanded immediate response. Surgeons traveled with troops, equipped with standardized instruments. Wounds were cleaned, stitched, and dressed with surprising consistency. Archaeological finds reveal a wide range of surgical tools: scalpels, forceps, probes, and bone saws. These instruments were carefully crafted and widely distributed. Surgery was still dangerous. Pain was severe. Infection common. But technique improved through repetition. Roman surgeons specialized in trauma. They learned through experience. Success was measured in survival, not theory. Civilian medicine benefited from this knowledge. Physicians treated fractures, hernias, cataracts, and abscesses. Dental care existed. Amputations were performed when necessary. Though internal surgery remained limited, external procedures advanced steadily. Pain management relied on alcohol, opium-based substances, and restraint. Sedation was crude but intentional. Comfort, while secondary, was not ignored. Perhaps Rome's most enduring medical legacy was public health. Roman engineers transformed urban living. Aqueducts delivered clean water across vast distances. Sewers removed waste. Public baths promoted hygiene. Streets were paved to reduce standing water. These systems reduced disease even without understanding its causes. Clean water mattered. Waste removal mattered. Fresh air mattered. Roman physicians recognized patterns. Certain environments made people sick. Others promoted health. Prevention became part of policy. Hospitals, as we recognize them today, did not yet exist. But valetudinaria, medical facilities, were established for soldiers, slaves, and gladiators. These spaces provided rest, care, and recovery. The concept of institutional care took root. Roman medicine also inherited ethical ideas from Greece. Physicians were expected to act responsibly. Yet regulation varied. Some practitioners were highly trained, others were not. Medicine was accessible but inconsistent. Social class influenced care. Wealthy citizens could afford private physicians. The poor relied on public remedies or household knowledge. Even so, Roman infrastructure benefited all. Urban populations grew dense. Disease spread easily. Plagues struck periodically, overwhelming medical capacity. Roman medicine could not prevent these crises. But it responded with organization rather than ritual. Physicians documented symptoms. Authorities attempted quarantines. Public spaces were managed. Religion still played a role. Temples to healing gods remained popular, but faith increasingly coexisted with practical intervention. Roman medicine valued continuity. Medical texts were copied and preserved. Knowledge accumulated. Greek theories were transmitted intact. Roman commentary added experience rather than abstraction. One of the most influential figures of this era was Galen, whose work would dominate medicine for centuries. Though Greek by birth, his career flourished in Rome. His anatomical studies, based largely on animal dissection, shaped understanding long after the empire fell. Galen's authority became both asset and obstacle. His ideas unified medical theory, but also discouraged challenge. Roman medicine, for all its practicality, did not fundamentally question inherited frameworks. This limitation would matter later. Yet Rome's contribution remains profound. By integrating medicine into state systems, Rome demonstrated that health was not solely an individual concern. It was a collective responsibility. Clean water saved lives. Organized care improved outcomes. Standardization reduced harm. Even without modern science, these measures mattered deeply. When the Western Roman Empire declined, much of this infrastructure collapsed. Cities shrank. Aqueducts fell into disrepair. Public health deteriorated. Medical knowledge fragmented. But Roman medical ideas did not vanish. They traveled east. They were preserved by scholars beyond Europe. They would return centuries later, reshaped and expanded. As we move forward, the center of medical learning shifts again. In the Islamic world, Greek and Roman texts will be translated, preserved, and transformed. Medicine will regain its scholarly momentum. As the political structures of the Western Roman world weakened, the knowledge it carried did not disappear. Instead, it traveled. Across the eastern Mediterranean, Persia, Central Asia, and the cities of the Islamic world, medicine found new life. Here, between the 8th and 13th centuries, healing became both a scholarly discipline and a moral calling. The Islamic Golden Age did not merely preserve ancient medicine, it expanded it. This transformation began with translation. Scholars working in cities such as Baghdad, Damascus, and Cairo collected texts from Greece, Rome, India, and Persia. Works by Hippocrates, Galen, and others were translated into Arabic with care and precision. But translation was only the first step. These texts were studied, debated, criticized, and revised. Medicine became an intellectual pursuit grounded in observation and reason, but guided by ethical and spiritual principles. Knowledge was seen as a form of worship. Healing the sick was an act of compassion. This worldview shaped medical practice profoundly. Hospitals, known as Bimaristans, became centers of care, learning, and research. Unlike earlier institutions, they were open to all, regardless of wealth, religion, or background. Patients were admitted, treated, and discharged systematically. Separate wards existed for different conditions. Cleanliness was emphasized. Records were kept. These hospitals were staffed by trained physicians, pharmacists, and nurses. Teaching occurred at the bedside. Students learned through observation and supervised practice. Medicine was institutionalized without becoming impersonal. Pharmacology advanced rapidly. Islamic scholars cataloged hundreds of substances, plants, minerals, and compounds, carefully noting their effects, dosages, and interactions. Pharmacies emerged as specialized institutions. Prescriptions became precise. Experimentation, though limited, was methodical. Surgery also progressed. Physicians such as Al-Zahrawi described surgical instruments and techniques in detail. His work illustrated tools designed for specific procedures, many of which resemble modern instruments. Surgery was no longer improvised. It was planned. Pain management improved through the use of anesthetic substances derived from plants. Though crude by modern standards, these methods reduced suffering. Anatomy remained constrained by religious and cultural limits on dissection, but observation deepened. Physicians recognized patterns of disease progression. They distinguished between contagious and non-contagious illnesses. Quarantine was practiced during outbreaks. Medical ethics were explicit. Physicians were expected to be knowledgeable, honest, and compassionate. They were accountable to both society and conscience. Medical texts discussed proper conduct, patient confidentiality, and professional responsibility. This ethical clarity strengthened trust between healer and patient. Perhaps the most influential medical figure of this era was Ibn Sina, known in the West as Avicenna. His canon of medicine synthesized centuries of knowledge into a comprehensive system. It addressed theory, diagnosis, treatment, and prevention. The canon emphasized clinical observation. It insisted that experience must guide theory. It recognized the influence of environment, diet, and mental state on health. For centuries, this work would shape medical education across Europe and the Middle East. Yet Islamic medicine was not static. Physicians challenged Galen. They corrected errors. They refined humoral theory. They incorporated ideas from Ayurveda and Chinese medicine through trade and scholarship. Medicine became global. Public health also advanced. Cities invested in sanitation. Clean water systems were maintained. Food safety was regulated. Physicians advised rulers on health policy. Epidemics were studied, not dismissed. Care extended beyond treatment to prevention. This comprehensive approach allowed Islamic medicine to flourish. When Europe later rediscovered ancient medical texts, it often encountered them through Arabic translations and commentaries. Knowledge returned enriched, expanded, and clarified. The Islamic Golden Age served as a bridge between antiquity and the modern world. Its physicians preserved what might have been lost. More importantly, they demonstrated that medicine could evolve without abandoning ethics, compassion, or humility. As political and economic shifts eventually slowed this period of growth, its medical legacy endured. In the next chapter, medicine will face new challenges in medieval Europe, where faith, fear, and fragile knowledge shape healing in a world recovering from collapse. When the political and urban structures of the Western Roman Empire collapsed, medicine in Europe did not simply pause. It fragmented. Knowledge survived, but unevenly. Texts were copied slowly by hand. Training became inconsistent. Infrastructure deteriorated. In many regions, healing returned to the household, the monastery, and the village. Medicine became local again. In this environment, faith shaped understanding. Illness was often interpreted as a spiritual trial, a moral test, or a consequence of divine will. Healing, therefore, required not only treatment of the body, but care for the soul. Prayer mattered. Monasteries emerged as centers of learning and healing. Monks preserved ancient texts, including works by Hippocrates and Galen, often without fully understanding them. Scriptoria copied medical manuscripts alongside religious writings. Libraries became sanctuaries for fragile knowledge. Within monastery walls, infirmaries provided care for the sick. Herbal gardens supplied remedies. Cleanliness, routine, and rest were emphasized. This stability allowed medicine to survive during centuries of upheaval. Monastic medicine was conservative. Innovation was rare. Authority was respected. Observation was filtered through tradition. Yet care was genuine. Compassion guided treatment. Outside monasteries, healing was practiced by a wide range of people. Midwives attended births. Wise women prepared herbal remedies. Bone setters treated fractures. Barber surgeons performed bloodletting, tooth extraction, and minor surgery. Medicine lacked standardization. Training varied widely. Some practitioners were skilled. Others relied on superstition. Regulation was minimal. Outcomes were unpredictable. Humoral theory, inherited from Greece and Rome, dominated medical thought. Balance remained central. Bloodletting became a common treatment for many ailments. Diet and purging were used to restore equilibrium. These practices persisted not because they were always effective, but because they fit existing theory. The body was still understood through inherited frameworks rather than direct investigation. Fear shaped medicine deeply. Epidemics struck medieval Europe repeatedly. Leprosy isolated sufferers into colonies. Smallpox scarred survivors. Most devastating was the Black Death, which swept across Europe in the 14th century, killing millions. Medicine was overwhelmed. Physicians struggled to explain the plague. Some blamed corrupted air. Others blamed planetary alignment or divine punishment. Treatments were desperate and often ineffective. Quarantine emerged as a response. Cities isolated the sick. Ships were held offshore. Movement was restricted. These measures, though imperfect, recognized contagion without understanding it. Public health measures were improvised under pressure. Faith intensified during crisis. Processions, prayer, and repentance became widespread. At times, these responses worsened spread. Fear fueled violence against marginalized groups, blamed for disease. Medicine was powerless to prevent suffering, but it did not disappear. Physicians recorded symptoms. Chroniclers documented progression. Experience accumulated slowly. Universities began to emerge in the later medieval period. Medical education became more formalized. Students studied texts, debated theory, and observed practice. Anatomy was taught through limited dissection, often of animals. Human dissection remained controversial, but gradually increased. Surgery remained distinct from academic medicine. Barber surgeons worked with their hands, while physicians relied on theory. This divide limited progress. Yet change was coming. The translation movement reintroduced Arabic medical texts to Europe. Works by Avicenna and others transformed curricula. Knowledge expanded. Observation regained importance. Hospitals slowly developed, often attached to religious institutions. Care became more organized. Standards improved incrementally. Medieval medicine was fragile, but it endured. It carried ancient ideas forward through centuries of instability. It preserved ethical concern, even when cures failed. It laid groundwork for future transformation. By the end of the medieval period, medicine stood on the edge of change. Anatomy would soon be explored openly. Surgery would become more precise. Experimentation would challenge authority. The next chapter will examine this moment of transition. When early surgery pushed against tradition, pain was confronted directly, and medicine began its slow awakening toward modern practice. By the late medieval period and into the early modern age, medicine began to change not through sudden discovery, but through quiet insistence. The body, long treated with caution and reverence, was slowly opened to direct study. Surgery, once limited to the surface, moved inward. Pain, once accepted as unavoidable, was questioned. Authority, once inherited without challenge, began to weaken. This was not a revolution. It was an awakening. Early surgeons worked in conditions that demanded courage. There was no reliable anesthesia. Infection was not understood. Mortality was high. Yet necessity forced intervention. Injuries from war, accidents, and childbirth required action when observation alone was no longer enough. Surgery became a craft learned through practice rather than theory. Barber surgeons continued to dominate the field. Their training was hands-on. They learned by doing, by watching outcomes, by surviving mistakes. Their work was often dismissed by academic physicians, yet their experience was invaluable. Gradually, boundaries blurred. Some physicians began to respect surgical knowledge. Surgeons began to record their methods. Manuals appeared, describing techniques, instruments, and outcomes. Knowledge became shareable. Anatomy played a central role in this transition. Public dissections, once rare and controversial, became more common. Human bodies were studied directly. Errors in ancient texts were noticed. Galen's authority weakened as observation contradicted theory. This shift was profound. For the first time, medicine began to trust the body itself as evidence. Artists and anatomists collaborated. Detailed illustrations captured muscles, bones, and organs with unprecedented accuracy. These images circulated, educating practitioners who might never attend a dissection. Understanding deepened slowly. Surgical techniques improved incrementally. Instruments were refined. Suturing became more precise. Wound care evolved. Cleanliness, though not yet framed through germ theory, gained importance through experience. Some surgeons noticed that washing hands and instruments improved outcomes. Others observed that fresh air mattered. These insights were practical, not theoretical. Pain remained central. Operations were traumatic. Speed became essential. Surgeons trained to work quickly, reducing suffering and shock. Alcohol, opium, and physical restraint were used to dull pain, but relief was limited. Despite this, patients consented. This willingness reflects desperation, trust, and hope. Surgery offered a chance, sometimes the only chance, of survival. Childbirth posed particular challenges. Midwives and surgeons worked alongside one another. Tools such as forceps were developed, saving lives while also introducing new risks. Ethics evolved in response. Surgeons debated when to operate. Risk was weighed carefully. Intervention without necessity was condemned. Failure was acknowledged. This honesty marked progress. Medical education expanded. Apprenticeship remained essential, but universities incorporated anatomy and surgery into curricula. Knowledge became more systematic. Printing accelerated dissemination. Books spread ideas rapidly. Errors were exposed. Innovation accelerated, yet limits persisted. Without understanding infection, postoperative mortality remained high. Hospitals could become centers of disease. Recovery was uncertain. Still, medicine had crossed another threshold. The body was no longer untouchable. Pain was no longer inevitable without question. Authority was no longer absolute. This period did not deliver modern medicine, it prepared it. By daring to look inside the body, to document what was found, and to share that knowledge, early surgeons laid the groundwork for future breakthroughs. The awakening was incomplete, but irreversible. In the closing reflection, we will step back from technique and chronology to consider what this long history reveals. Not about medicine alone, but about humanity's relationship with suffering, care, and hope. As this long history draws to a close, it helps to step away from names, dates, and techniques and return to something simpler. A human body. For as long as bodies have existed, they have broken, they have weakened, they have failed without warning, and for just as long, other humans have gathered nearby, trying to understand what was happening and what might be done. Medicine did not begin with answers. It began with presence. A hand placed on a fevered forehead. A watch kept through the night. A shared silence when nothing more could be done. Long before medicine became a profession, it was an act of care shaped by attention and responsibility. Across shamans, scribes, physicians, surgeons, and scholars, one thread remains constant. No matter how limited the knowledge, people refused to look away from suffering. They tried. Sometimes they tried with ritual, sometimes with herbs, sometimes with knives and trembling hands. Often they failed. Sometimes they helped without knowing why. What we now call progress was rarely obvious in the moment. It arrived slowly, unevenly, and often disappeared again. Knowledge was lost to war, fire, and neglect. Certainty hardened into dogma. Superstition returned where observation had once grown. And yet medicine endured. Not because it was always correct, but because it was necessary. Every civilization faced the same questions. Why does the body betray us? Why do some survive while others do not? How much pain is acceptable in the attempt to heal? When should we act, and when should we wait? There were no final answers, only responses shaped by culture, belief, and experience. Ancient healers understood something modern medicine sometimes forgets, that illness is not only biological, it is emotional, social, existential. Fear changes the body. Hope does too. Care itself alters outcomes. Even when the treatments failed, the act of tending mattered. This is why medicine was never purely technical. It was always moral. Who deserves care? Who decides what risk is acceptable? How much authority should a healer hold? These questions appeared long before laboratories and licenses. They remain unanswered even now. The slow awakening of surgery marked a turning point, but not a conclusion. Opening the body brought knowledge, but also new dangers. Progress did not erase uncertainty. It reshaped it. Modern medicine would soon transform everything: pain, infection, survival itself. But those advances rest on centuries of trial, error, courage, and compassion. Every antiseptic procedure echoes a moment when someone noticed that cleaner wounds healed better. Every anesthetic traces back to centuries of unbearable pain endured because there was no alternative. Nothing emerged fully formed. When we look back, it is tempting to judge earlier medicine harshly, to focus on what was misunderstood or misguided. But this view misses the deeper truth. Medicine was never about perfection. It was about responsibility. To care for another body is to accept uncertainty. To intervene is to risk harm. To do nothing is also a choice with its own consequences. Every healer across history stood in that tension, and most of them chose to stay. They stayed with the sick, with the wounded, with the dying. They stayed even when knowledge failed them, even when belief replaced evidence, even when hope was thin. This long vigil is the real history of medicine. Not a march toward triumph, but a quiet refusal to abandon one another. As this story fades, it does not end in the modern world, or in mastery, or in certainty. It ends where it began, with attention, with the recognition that the body is fragile, and that caring for it is never simple. That medicine, at its best, is not control, but humility paired with effort. You do not need to remember every detail of this journey. You do not need to carry forward its names or theories. Let what remains be simpler. For thousands of years, humans have tried to ease suffering. They have done so imperfectly, patiently, and often without understanding. That persistence matters. It is why medicine continues to evolve, not because it seeks perfection, but because it responds to need. And that need is timeless. So, as this history settles, let it do so gently. Let it remind you that care has always existed, even in darkness, that knowledge grows slowly, that healing is rarely complete, but often meaningful, and that long before medicine had certainty, it had compassion, and sometimes that was enough.